Hello art lovers, and welcome back to my studio. For this next piece, I wanted to do something a little bit more romantic in honor of Valentine's Day, and I decided to get some inspiration from one of the masters, Gustav Klimt. For me, this piece has always represented kind of the luxury and opulence of romance, and just the wealth and gratefulness you feel when you're in the arms of someone who deeply loves you. At the start of the new year, I began meditating a lot more on just inner peace and focusing on the things that I was thankful for as opposed to things that had gone wrong in the past year. And one of the main things that I kept coming back to is my partner, Vince. When I think of what I'm grateful for, he's always at the very top of the list. So I wanted to create something that represented more of our own kind of romantic luxury. Neither of us is super into gold on gold on gold, so I decided to shift the colors of my painting to something a little bit more dark and moody. This painting is also pretty special in that I obviously don't draw a lot of men, so I was actually really proud of the fact that I was actually able to capture more masculine features. I personally found that creating sharper lines and shadows, as well as adding in more nicks and imperfections in the skin, really helped to sell the more masculine features. And actually, when I think about how hard I was focusing on refining the details of the male figure, I realized it's kind of a direct inverse correlation to what I would normally think about for the female. And that's usually curvier lines and shadows and just not non-existent but softer marks and lines on the face. I've noticed over time that creating a lot of definition, say in the smile lines or lines under the eyes, it doesn't necessarily make the female portrait look masculine, but it does tend to age it up in a way that I'm usually not going for. So once I fleshed out concept, line art, and colors, I printed out just the lines on regular printer paper and prepared them for transferring onto the wooden panel. And because this wooden panel is 12 by 16, it's obviously larger than a regular sheet of paper, so I had to print it out in sections and then kind of tape it together before I did my graphite rub on the back. If you're unfamiliar with this technique, I basically take a really thick graphite stick and rub only where the lines are that I want to transfer. I actually like this a lot better than Seural transfer paper because it's a lot less messy when I do finally do the transfer. Oh, and it's also really important to sand down the edges of any wood panels that you buy. They're usually sanded down pretty well, but sometimes they have little chips and splinters in the hard corners that can be pretty painful when you're painting or transferring. I also prefer to paint on unprimed wood, so getting a super fine grit and sanding the full surface helps to make sure that I'm working with a completely flat area that doesn't have any weird bumps or levels in it. Now, specifically for wood, once I've done the transfer, I actually spritz it with some water just to kind of seal in the graphite, and then once it's dry, it shifts around a lot less when I'm refining the line art. And while this technique doesn't work as cleanly on paper, you can actually use it to kind of make a graphite underpainting for your watercolor to give it a little bit more value and contrast. Up in the corner there, I'll add a link to a video where I kind of use this graphite underpainting technique and explain the benefits of it a little bit better. Now, speaking of underpainting, I'm finally adding some color. So I'll be honest and say that I initially intended on this being a fully watercolor on wood painting, and it was going fine, but I have to keep reminding myself that when I'm working with large washes of watercolor on wood, it's a lot harder to control, I feel, the bleed. And again, I'm fully aware that it's actually because I'm working on unsealed wood that I'm having this issue. But I've done tests with the watercolor grounds, and frankly, I'm not super impressed with the color payoff. And I also have a really hard time with layering the watercolor. The base always seems to lift, and I've even gotten to the point where I'm lifting the ground off of the wood. So I just like this way better. But like I was saying, it means that controlling larger washes is more difficult. So you can see here I actually transferred over to using a different medium, which is my Acryla Gouache. So I started out pretty timid with the application, laying down really thin washes of the Acryla Gouache. And although it gave me more control, I was still really nervous about potentially losing the line art that I spent the first third of this video refining. I'm sure one day I'll get over my ridiculous attachment to my line art, but today is not that day. Anyway, I was really happy with the contrast that I was getting between the opaqueness of the characters and the transparency in the background. The whole reason for doing any of my paintings on wood is because I really want to capture and enhance that wood texture. So I was glad I was able to kind of get both in this piece. One thing that I'll definitely have to remember about this piece is how easy it was to get a smooth wash. I have found in the past that I have a really hard time getting smoothness with straight acrylic. It usually comes out really streaky, and I want to give acrylic the benefit of the doubt and say it's my own fault for using really cheap acrylics. But this Acryla Gouache by Holbein was gifted to me by none other than my very sweet husband, and from what I understand, it's a really good brand, and it goes on so smooth and like creamy that it just makes working in these solid color washes so much easier. Speaking of smooth and creamy, for the line work I go in here with the Dollar and Rowney FW acrylic ink to re-establish the line art that was hidden by the Acryla Gouache. And actually the whole reason why I'm not using just the acrylic ink instead of Acryla Gouache is because when you layer it on opaquely like I'm doing for the line art, it tends to have a very high shine to it. And since I'm more comfortable with things like watercolor and more so now gouache, I don't generally lean into the whole shiny aesthetic, but you'll see in a few minutes at the end here I lean in pretty hard. Now, while my list of supplies grows far beyond what I had originally intended for this piece, as always, I'll be sure to name all of the different mediums and supplies that I use in the description below. Next up though is this golden fluid acrylic, which I use for all of the gold accents in this piece. Golden is a brand that I recognize as a much more professional, high quality acrylic paint, but the downside is it's far more expensive than I can afford if I want to get like a full set of colors, at the moment anyway. So for now, I've only had the opportunity to experiment with the gold, and I don't have any complaints. Okay, let's see. The blue that you just saw for this detailing that I'm doing in the background was the acrylic ink again, and the white is Dr. P.H. Martin's paper white or pen white ink. Again, I like that ink because if I screw something up, I can lift it. It's easy to blend. Yeah, and I just kind of played around with this like cool texture. I don't know what to call it. I was showing this to Vince, and he was like, it looks kind of like almost symbolically like water or like coral, like they're underwater next to like a coral reef. And I was like, sure, yeah, that sounds awesome, I'm gonna go with that. So they're like in the water chilling next to a coral reef getting kissies. I don't know. But yeah, so I went ahead and added, I wanted to incorporate more of the gold, so I gave him like a gold crown with little leafy things on it, and added little gold sparkles in the hair, and I essentially did kind of a similar effect for the woman, where she's got like golden flowers in her hair, and then again with little gold speckles. But yeah, going back for a second, you guys know I love like precision and line art, but while I did the kind of quote-unquote coral area for this piece, I really had to kind of turn off my analytical brain and force myself to be a lot looser than I usually am while painting. And I actually, if you follow me on Instagram, I did a live video while I was painting that section, and it was really relaxing and kind of therapeutic to, once I like made myself turn off my brain and just do it. It was really fun, and it was great to get a chance to like paint live and kind of chat a little bit with you guys. So if you were there for that, thank you, and if you haven't seen it, go watch it. But it was like an hour long of me just like painting squiggles, and hopefully that was interesting for you guys. Just because I really enjoyed myself, and I actually think it's really good to share like how long painting actually takes for me anyway. I've said many times before, I'm a slow painter, and I've just accepted that about myself. It's fine. But I don't know, I think a lot of people think that you just like throw paint on a board and it's fast and easy and it's always fun, and I think showing that it takes time and it takes thought, and even when you're not thinking, you know, it's not always easy. I think it's good to share that. Speaking of things not always being easy, I don't know why I was under the impression that this tape was gonna keep the watercolor from spreading, so I had to like rethink my idea for the border and just go ahead and lay in some gold here. I initially intended on it being just a natural wood tone, which would have ended up with it kind of like a gold tone anyway once it was sealed, but I decided to go with gold, and then I used the Acryla Gouache in blue to lay in kind of a contrast border on the very ends. And that was about it as far as actual painting application goes. For the final steps of this piece, I want to say the only medium that I used that wasn't light fast was probably the watercolor. So I decided to just do a thin coat of like a spray varnish, and that's the Krylon UV resistant clear that I have. But it ended up giving it a way shinier finish in certain areas that I wasn't really expecting. Mostly in areas where the Acryla Gouache or the acrylic ink was laid down. So I let it dry and kind of stepped away from it And then when I took a second look at it, I decided, okay, I needed to make this more uniform. So I grabbed some of my Liquitex gloss varnish and used that to unify all the different finishes on this piece. And that's about it. I did 3 coats of the varnish. The second coat I put on was maybe a little thicker than it was supposed to be, but I wasn't too worried about it because I had it, as you can see, inside of this cardboard box to keep any dust away from it, and I was letting it sit overnight after the second coat. When I did the third coat, it was relatively thin, and it was really just to like seal in some areas that I didn't quite reach on the sides with the brush. Then I called this piece finally done and you could see in this little clip that it is like super shiny, which normally I don't like, but I don't know, I feel like it kind of adds to the luxury of this one. Just really happy with the way that it turned out and how relaxing and romantic this piece ended up being. Well, I do hope that you all enjoyed watching my process. I just want to remind you to give a big old kiss to your life partner and remember to appreciate them as much as possible. I love you all so much for watching, and I'll see you real soon in the next video. Bye!